Smoking Solar Panel here. In this video, we'll be checking out the electronic sound source from Land in the Rising Sun, real-life Minecraft dogs, underpants vending machines, and screaming toilets. Not like there aren't any of those here in the US, but they're mounted atop poles and alert us of impending danger. And the only ones who crap in them are birds. Okay, we're getting off topic. I'm here to talk about the melodix. For those who don't know, the melodix is a product by the audio equipment manufacturing company TOA. It's normally used by Japan's disaster warning system to test its hardware with. There are 4 different versions of the TOA melodix: the ML202N, the ML301B, the ML304B, and the ML1000. Let's start with the ML202N. The 202N sounds like a retro video game due to it using square waves to make music. It has 2 built-in chimes at the user's choice, and both chimes can have their tempo changed with a knob on the back of the unit. But because the 202N's chimes are fixed into the console, you can't have more than 2 chimes per unit, meaning if you wanted more than 2 chimes, you'd need more than 1 unit. And this would make the setup rather bulky. TOA later rectified this problem with the introduction of the 304B and melodix cards. More info on that later. Now let's move on to the ML301B. The 301B can only do 2 chimes: the Westminster chime and a 4-tone chime generally used to indicate an intercom announcement, kind of like what you hear on airplanes. And while the 301B did introduce a Westminster bell sound that sounds like a higher-pitched taco bell, it's the only real chime it can do that doesn't sound 8-bit. And this Westminster chime carried on into all the other melodixes that were released. It's the MCT01 on the ML304B, and track 1 on all the ML1000 cards. Okay, now on to the ML304B. The 304B is the first melodix to use cards, known as melodix cards, to play music. This significantly cut down on the bulk, as you wouldn't need to use more than 1 unit for several chimes. That is, unless of course you want more than 4 chimes in one setup. There are 17 different standard release melodix cards made for the ML304B, and each card has a different tune on it. There's the MCT01, TO2, TO3, TO4, TO5, TO6, TO7, TO8, TO9, T10, T11, T12, T13, T14, T15, MO1, and MO2. Okay, now on to the ML1000. The only melodix still in production, I believe, is the ML1000. The melodix ML1000 is TOA's latest model. It uses cards just like the ML304B, but instead of 1 chime per card, it's 8 chimes a card. And there's only 1 card slot in the ML1000 compared to the 4 slots in the ML304B, and I can see why. With each ML1000 card holding up to 8 chimes, I don't really see the need for more than 1 slot. There are 3 different standard issue ML1000 melodix cards: the MC1010, the MC1020, and the MC1030, all containing 8 chimes. The chimes can be scrolled through and selected via a numeric display and a set of 4 buttons. 2 are the up and down buttons, and 2 are the start and stop buttons. And when a chime is started, this little green LED starts flickering as the data from the card is being read. And it continues to flicker until the chime is stopped. This light above it flashes continuously as long as the device is plugged in. And that would probably be an annoyance to some people, so TOA provided a cover that goes over the slot area so you don't see that light when you don't need to. Okay, let's have a look at my unit. This is my TOA melodix ML304B. Why is it called the ML304B instead of the ML304? Well, it's because there's 2 different versions of the 304. The 304 and the 304B. The only notable difference between the 2 is their colors. The ML304 comes in this ugly shade of bluish gray, out of which its slots apparently tend to yellow over time. And the ML304B comes in a much better looking black. I'm not trying to judge people who like this shade of bluish gray, I'm just saying the black one looks a lot better in my opinion. I got my ML304B from a Yahoo Japan auction site and shipped to me via a proxy service known as Buyee. These machines normally go for quite a lot of money, and the cards do too, so I'm either going to have to spend a bit of time saving up my money and buying the cards every few months or so, or just hope I get lucky and find a stash of melodix cards being sold for a price I'm prepared to pay. Now the likelihood of that happening is pretty freaking low, so I think I'm just going to have to stick with plan A. Save up my money a bit until I can afford a card and repeat the process for the rest of the cards. This doesn't necessarily mean I'll be giving up 3D printing for a while though. It just means it may or may not be a little longer to get a big project done than usual due to each roll of film costing around $20 per roll. Okay, we're getting distracted. Let's get back to business. First of all, I friggin' love the way TOA did these cards. This looks totally badass with its reflective lettering and IBM logo style font. It's just a shame you can't see it when it's in the machine. But I guess it sort of makes up for it with a pretty cool chime, which is what I'm collecting the cards for anyway. If I only liked the look, I would have stopped the collection right here and just hung it on the wall. Now there's 2 different label styles for each card: the silver reflective rounded sided label, and the silver less reflective rounded corner rectangular label. And I vaguely remember hearing something about how the more futuristic looking reflective label version is actually older than the less reflective label version. So it's evolving, just backwards. Okay, now let's plug this thing into power. Now the melodix is a Japanese device, meaning it runs off of 100 volts AC rather than 120 volts AC power standard we use here in the US. So I need to get out the red devil and set it to 100 volts AC so I can run the melodix off of the correct voltage. I don't need to worry about converting the frequency though, as the melodix can use both 50 and 60 Hz. And this is the same case among a lot of other Japanese appliances, because the country uses both frequencies. Japan uses 100 volts AC at 50 Hz in the north and 100 volts AC at 60 Hz in the south. This thing uses quite a strange power connector. It's basically the opposite of a plug, and I can literally plug it into itself. The connector on the back of this unit is basically a plug that's too shy to show itself. TOA did fix this with later ML304Bs and the ML1000 by using the same power input plug you'd find in the back of most PC towers, so the ML304B I have is most likely an earlier model. So let's plug the cord into the back of the melodix and shove the plug into the devil's mouth. Okay, now I need to plug a speaker of sorts into it, so I got out my mini beside my Sense amplifier, wired a reflex horn up to it, wired in a 5mm mono barrel jack because that's what the melodix uses for the sound output jack, and plugged it into the output jack hole on the back of the melodix. Now I didn't want to be a jack, so instead of having my dad drive me all the way over to a store that sells these jacks, I cut the jack off of the microphone part of this pair of headphones because I don't have any devices that have a microphone jack hole that size. Okay, now that it's all set up, let's stick in a melodix card. Now there's one more neat thing you can do with the chimes in the ML304B, and that's change their tempo. You can make the chime sound like it's just had 1,000 Red Bulls, or make it sound like it just finished a big Thanksgiving dinner. First I'll play the chime back at its normal tempo. Now I'll grab a flat screwdriver, stick it in the hole labeled tempo in Japanese, and turn it to its fastest setting. Now let's hear what it sounds like now. Okay, let's hear it on its slowest setting. The melodix has a bunch of different tempos it can play its chimes at, but it would take too long to go through all of them. And here's another little interesting fact. If you push a button above an empty slot during playback, it'll abort the chime. So if you start the wrong chime, you can stop it, but only if you push a button above an empty slot. If you push a button above a slot with another card in it, it just switches the chime over to that one. Each slot has its own volume and tempo adjustment knobs, all of them having to be turned with a small flat screwdriver. I think it was designed this way so there's little to no chance of accidentally turning them. I currently have all 4 slots set to the normal tempo and about half volume, because full volume is nearly twice as loud as my MP3 player's loudest volume setting. So if I were to play back the chimes through that amplifier at full blast, it might either distort horribly, blow the speaker, or mess up the amplifier. So I keep it at about half volume most of the time. But when I record the chimes from the melodix to my computer using the line input, I need to turn down the volume on the melodix almost all the way to keep it from clipping. Almost. Now I don't want to have to perpetually use this variac to power the melodix, or use one of those bricks of a voltage converter, as it looks very unprofessional and adds more bulk and wire to the mix. So I'm just going to do a special modification that will make it able to run off of 120 volts AC at 60 Hz with no problems. This operation will also give me the chance to show you the insides of the TOA Melodix ML304B. Okay, now we're inside. Right here is the chip responsible for the chimes. It's a YM220C by Yamaha. The machine reads the data from the card and the chip plays it back, sort of like a MIDI file. It's kind of hard to explain. Here's my best guess on how it works. Let's say I'm the melodix card inserter and this is the melodix. So I'll start the keyboard recording here and play some notes. That would be one melodix card inserted. And when I press the button associated with those notes, it plays those notes. And if I record on one of these other tracks here, then I've inserted another so-called melodix card. And I'll play back the recording by pressing the associated button. The recorded data on that chip interacts with the synth instrument chip in the keyboard and plays back the notes electronically. So the keyboard sort of plays itself. This is similar to how the melodix card interacts with the melodix's sound chip. The note data on the card interacts with the sound chip and sort of plays it like a piano, albeit electronically instead of with keys. So the melodix is sort of like a keyboard synthesizer, but without the keys. Okay, back to the melodix's innards. Now if you're wondering what this is up here, well, it's to set the delay time before the chime. When you push the start button, there's a few seconds before the chime starts. In this case it was 4 seconds. Now why would you want to delay the performance? Well, the answer is simple. It's all down to the fact that you can rig the melodix to trigger an external amplifier when a chime is started, and most amps take a moment or two to fully turn on when power is applied. This delay in the chime time gives the amplifier time to turn all the way on before the chime starts, thus preventing the beginning of the chime from being cut off. And right over here is a relay, which is what made that clicking sound at the beginning and end of every chime. This relay enables you to hook up an external device of sorts, like an amplifier, to the melodix and have it only operational while the chime is active. But the relay is only rated for 24 volts DC at 0.5 amps, so if I were to wire this amplifier's power lead carrying 120 volts AC in series with this relay, it would probably ruin it. So I'm going to have to use an external relay that can take more power and connect the amplifier to that in order to make this work properly. More on that later. And right here is the part we're after. This is the melodix's main power transformer. It takes the 100 volts AC and converts it to 12 volts AC. So I just need a 12 volt AC transformer that runs on 120 volts AC instead of 100 volts AC. Here's one from a broken AC adapter. The transformer still works though, which is the part needed for this transformer transplant anyways. So I'll just cut this wire here and here, take the old transformer out, put the new one in, solder in the wires, and plug it into 120 volts AC at 60 Hz. Okay, now let's test it. Okay, it seems to run fine. Now let's mount the transformer. Now unfortunately this transformer doesn't fit the mounting bracket or the mounting screw slots. So it looks like I'm going to have to use some double-sided mounting tape to hold this thing in place. Okay, now that that's taken care of, let's put it back together. I made the mistake of miscalculating the size of the transformer. the case would not go back on properly. When I plugged it in, it would make a vibrating sound from the transformer vibrating the case. So I found another one, believe it or not, that outputs a little bit of a lower amperage, but it'll still do the job because I measured the amperage the melodix's motherboard pulls from the transformer. The maximum is only about 0.25 amps, so therefore this one outputs 0.75 amps, 12 volts AC, so this one should do okay. Well, I tried that transformer, but the chimes all had a slight 60 Hz hum to them, so this transformer's out. And here's the new one. This one came from an old boombox, and it also has a shield around it, I presume to keep the tiny magnetic fields away from the cassette deck of the boombox. This is also good in the case of the melodix, as it will keep the magnetic field away from the melodix cards too. And trust me, I do not want to break these precious cards. This one seems to work quite well, despite not fitting the mounting bracket, so I had to stick this one in with mounting tape as well. Okay, now let's put it back together again. And now for a finishing touch. I'm actually pretty curious if I can get the relay system to turn my amplifier on and off depending on the status of the chime. But like I said earlier, I can't just wire the 120 volt AC line directly to the relay in series, so I'll need a secondary relay with its own power source, 12 volts DC 200 milliamps in this case. And that relay will trigger the amplifier when the chime is activated and disengage it when the chime is stopped. So I'll use this relay I got from Hobbytown's Radio Shack Express for a few bucks as the melodix's secondary relay. And I soldered it to a board and attached an AC adapter jack plug and some wires. Now, I didn't want it to cut the main wire to the amplifier, so I just opened it up, soldered some wires to the power button in parallel, and fed them through one of those holes in the bottom. This way I can still trigger the amplifier manually if I so please, as well as use the pass-through outlet on the back, which is where I'll plug in the melodix. Now I've 3D modeled and printed an enclosure for this relay so it's not exposed to the open air and risk shorting out on something. Now originally I was going to wait until I'd finished 3D printing the rinxlen PBM10 before making the relay enclosure, but it failed. So instead of reprinting it, I used this opportunity to print the relay circuit enclosure because I didn't have enough filament to reprint the PBM10's enclosure. Okay, now that I mounted the relay circuit in the case and closed it up, it's time to test it with my continuity checker. So here's what the relay sounds like for those interested. See if you can find out what I'm typing in Morse code. Leave your guesses in the comment section. Okay, enough screwing around. Let's wire it up to the melodix, and then the amplifier, and then see if this works. Now I've got an old telephone's AC adapter here, which I'll use to power the relay circuit. It's 12 volts DC, so it should power the relay just fine. It also supplies 200 milliamps max, so it should be able to handle this component as it only draws 30 milliamps. So I plug in my AC adapter, plug the jack into the jack plug, plug in the melodix and amplifier, stick a card in the slot, and see if it works. Alright, it works. This device was pretty expensive, so I must protect it. My precious. So I'll keep this device downstairs most of the time. That way during severe weather it'll be less likely to be destroyed if a tornado comes. I'll put the setup right on top of this fireplace whenever used because it looks like the perfect spot for this mess. All the wires can be hidden neatly behind everything, and I'll have pretty easy access to all the buttons too. I also gotta say it fit pretty nicely aesthetically here too. So I'll go ahead and put the amp here first. Then I'll shove all these cables I put together in the back of the space where the melodix will go. As you can see here, all the plugs, wires, and external relay will all be behind the melodix. In the extension cord I plug the melodix's power cord and the external relays AC adapter will plug into the amplifier's pass-through outlet located on the back of the amp. And now I'll plug everything I need to into the melodix. This includes the sound cable, the power cord, and even the external relay, that of which now plugs in the melodix instead of using the screw terminals. I know that doesn't look like a very good component, but Hobbytown was out of the exact connectors I needed, which was an inline jack connector. I did have one jack connector, but it was an on-board one, so I had to make my own using that instead. This plug setup will make it easier to remove the melodix from the shelf in the event the machine either needs service, or I need to record a chime directly from the device to my computer, which is what I plan on doing every time I get a new card. I'll record the chime on standard tempo directly from the device through the line input on my computer and post it to YouTube so you can hear the chime in full quality. Now after I post the next Tornado Siren Madness episode, I'll post the first melodix's ML304B chime to my channel, the Westminster Bell, from the MCT01 melodix card in the ML304B. Now I want to make a special little shelf to store my melodix cards in, so I 3D modeled and printed such a shelf and put a neat label on it. Then I put it right to the left of the melodix. So now I got my mini beside my son's new sound source set up. But since I've only got two MCT01s at the moment and the cards are so expensive, next month's pre-test chime will probably have to be a rinxlen chime of sorts. Probably the medley version of Mandarin Flower. Now I wanted to point this light right at the melodix to show it off more, but after seeing what happens to some melodix cards over time, presumably from being under intense bright light for a prolonged period of time, I decided I'd either keep all my melodix cards on the shelf when not in use, or keep the ones I want to use for the next pre-siren test chimes in the slots while keeping the light pointing somewhere where it's not pointing directly at the setup. I'll probably end up going with the latter of the two. Now some of you may or may not have noticed the ABCD things above this long wiring bus. This is so you can connect a timer to the melodix to make it chime automatically. I do not have one of these yet due to me saving that money for melodix cards at the moment, but if I ever do get one of those timers, I'll presumably be able to make the pre-test chimes automatic, which would enable me to go and record different sirens again while the pre-test chime goes off without me having to be there. But the downside of this is that it would only work on the melodix, so it'd still need to be there to trigger the pre-test chime manually if I were doing a chime with a device other than the melodix. And one more thing I forgot to mention is the spelling of the word melodix on the unit versus the cards. On the unit it's spelled melodix, but on the card it's spelled melodix. Toa seems to have understood this spelling difference was weird, so when they released the ML1000, they spelled melodix the same way on both the unit and the cards. But anyways, that's it. This is Broken Solar Panel signing off.